Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Changing Tides podcast. In each episode, we invite guests to have honest conversations about their mental health journeys with the goal of destigmatizing mental health within the Asian American Pacific Islander community. Due to the nature of the podcast, we'll be discussing a variety of mental health topics and possibly triggering experiences. While we and the majority of our guests are not trained professionals, we encourage you to practice self-care while listening and seek professional guidance if you or a loved one is in need of support. With that said, let's start the episode. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Changing Tides podcast. This is going to be a little bit of a different episode. That's why there wasn't a little snippet in the beginning. We're kind of just jumping right in. We are recording, or you are going to hear an interview that I did where I was interviewed alongside my dad, actually, for Keiro. Keiro is another program that's in Little Tokyo that has a really amazing goal. Let me just read it directly off their website. Keiro was founded in 1961, and they aim to improve the quality of life for older adults and their caregivers in the Japanese American community in LA, Orange, and Ventura counties. So Keiro has an amazing goal, and I was really honored that, they asked Changing Tides to speak. I did not nominate myself. The rest of the CT crew actually said, hey, you and your dad should go speak to go have a multi-generational viewpoint on mental health and maybe be able to address it from different sides of the spectrum. So it was really exciting. I was very nervous to do the interview, but I think it went well. So what you're going to hear is the Keiro speaker series that my dad and I were invited to do, and I hope you enjoy. So without further ado, here is me and my dad.
Hi, Jeff. Hi, Matthew. Let me unmute you there.
Hello.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Thank you both for making the time to be here tonight. I think I'm really looking forward to tonight's conversation. I've been thinking about it all week, and I'm really excited for this. So, to kind of start the conversation between us, want to kind of know about your maybe mental health journey. So, Jeff, would you mind kind of getting us started with your mental health journey?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I remember it very vividly. It kind of started in 2007. I was in my mid-40s, and I, with my 3 boys and wife, went to Hawaii to attend a conference, and we were having a great time. In fact, while we were there, I ended up extending our stay by 2 nights just because we were having so much fun. It was on the island of Kauai. Had a great time, no problem there. But then when I came back to Los Angeles and went back to work, the first day back, I became dysfunctional. I went into my office, turned off the lights, closed the door, and just put my head down on my desk. I didn't know what it was because I hadn't experienced it this way before. But I did go to our company EAP, Employee Assistance Program, and found out what was going on at least at a high level. When I look back earlier in my career, before 2007, I, in retrospect, see small markers of showing that I had the startings of depression and anxiety. There was one time when I was driving home from work, I thought I was having a heart attack, but it was an anxiety attack. Fast forward back to when I came back to work after our family vacation. I went to EAP. They were very helpful. I was very fortunate. Boeing has a good medical program, and I was referred to a psychologist who then referred me to a psychiatrist. Since then, I started on a med regimen, which probably took 2 years to get it right. I mean, to the point where I was not feeling any of the effects. And even to this day, there are small adjustments that I need to make to my regimen. So I continued to see my psychologist until she passed away, unfortunately. And to this day, I continue to see my psychiatrist, who keeps me tuned up. Let me get into my family a little bit. We have 3 boys, ranging in age from 23 to 29. And unfortunately, I passed along my mental health to them. They all had depression and anxiety to a certain extent through their young lives. I was planning all along to let them know when maybe they were 40 or 30, let them know about this so they're cognizant of it. What surprised me was how early in life that they had this. So there's a lot of guilt that comes along with that, passing that along to my boys. But they're all doing good now. So that's kind of a capsule of my mental health journey since 2007.
Thank you so much for sharing. That's since 2007, it's been a long journey, and even since before that, I think you mentioned panic attack in the car ride and all of that. I'm kind of curious to know, Jeff. You said you came home from the vacation, you went into your office. What was the instinct inside of you to say, "I need help. I'm going to go to the EAP office"? Like, what was inside of you that said that I need to do that, or was it a conversation that you might have had with your wife or somebody else?
No, I just knew I needed help. Um, uh, yeah, I was just so dysfunctional. I just had to close my eyes and close the door to my office and keep to myself for a while. And our EAP was just downstairs, so I went down immediately to see him.
Wow. Uh, It's nice that the EAP office was in the same building as you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Jeff. I kind of want to make sure we capture both of your stories at the same time. So, Matthew, would you be willing to talk about your mental health journey?
Yeah, I think mine has it's kind of blurry where exactly it started. It was somewhere between sophomore and junior year of high school. I think junior year is when I was becoming more aware, like, oh, this is something to be worried about. Sophomore year, there were like little hints at it. I had just lost my grandmother. So, there were some things here and there that were like, it brought me down. But I bounced back for a time, and as mental health fluctuates, and then junior year was when it got noticeably bad. I didn't know what to call it. I've heard of depression, I've heard of anxiety. I just didn't know that's what I was going through. So at the time, whenever I'd talk about it with anyone, I'd call it a funk. I was just in a funk. I was in a down place. Um, so I know we'll discuss more specifics from my standpoint. Um, but to kind of summarize like the journey I've been on, I'm honestly and I'm just so grateful for it. Um, it's been tough at times, of course, but it's taught me about who I am and who I want to be, and I've grown so much through it. I mean, it's strengthened relationships. It's strengthened myself and how well I know myself and my needs and asking for help. And it's brought me to speak here today and hopefully make an impact on someone else. But yeah, from high school, that's kind of where it all started for me, and from there is where the journey kind of went.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. You mentioned age 17, maybe feeling anxiety, maybe feeling depression, some words you've heard. What were some like key signs for you that you knew that you were struggling?
So in these times when I was in my quote unquote funk, I completely removed myself from everyone. At school during lunch, instead of hanging out with my friends, I would find a quiet spot of campus. I'd just sit down and eat my lunch by myself. I didn't want to communicate with anyone. I didn't want to interact. It just being social was so draining for me. So there were times of that junior year, but I think when I realized I needed to get help was my senior year. It's senior year. It's supposed to be a fun time. You're about to move on to college. It's like the last hurrah of high school. And for me, I was in a really good place on paper. I was the student body president. Um, I was co-editor in chief of the yearbook with two really good friends. And, I was quote unquote popular. Like I had what everyone would think is going perfectly for me, but I couldn't enjoy any of it. All of it was because I was in like kind of like a place where people knew who I was. It was even more draining for me. Um, I distinctly remember on when it was at its worst. I would leave school. I'd leave right away as soon as I could. I wouldn't say bye to anyone. I just beeline it to my car. And then I'd drive home. I'd park right in front of my house. And for 5 or 10 minutes, I'd just turn off the car and just sit in this silence where I could just be alone, completely nothing happening around me. And those 5 to 10 minutes are what gave me the will to kind of put on a brave face and tell my mom when I walked into the door that I had a good day of school. Because at this time, I didn't realize, but I thought that telling anyone about this was the biggest burden I could put on anyone. Later, I realized that wasn't the case, but at the time, I just didn't want to burden anyone. But at nights, I couldn't sleep. My mind was rushing with the worst possible thoughts of what was going to happen tomorrow, the next week, the next month, the next year. My mind was racing. I could never sleep. As a result of all these worst case scenarios and just everything going wrong, I couldn't feel happy. I would blame anyone else around me, my family, my friends. I pushed everyone away at the time. And I realized this wasn't sustainable. So when I realized this wasn't sustainable, I sought help. And I went to my parents because I know my dad just said like when he was going to tell us about to be aware of this when we turned 30 or 40. But a long time ago when I was a kid, I distinctly remember my dad saying something about a chemical imbalance. When I heard chemical imbalance, I thought at the time when I was like 10, 12, I thought he had a stomach ache. That's what I thought that's what I thought what that was. But then upon realizing that wasn't the case, I was like, oh, this one little thing my dad told me once, I remembered that. So I felt comfortable going to my parents and saying, listen, I know something is wrong and I don't know what to do. I love you. You're my parents. I need help. I need to do something. So because my dad had experienced all this before, I wasn't aware at the time, but because he was able to help me find help, see a psychiatrist, get a therapist. And my journey is a little bit different from my dad's. I was very lucky. The first medication I tried was the right one. It's the one I'm still on to this day. The dosage has changed here and there, but it's the same medication that's worked for me. And I was super lucky in that sense. But it took me 2 years to open up about this and realize that this was a chemical imbalance and that I had depression, not just a funk. And that when it comes to stuff like that, leaning on someone else, whether it be family such as me or friends, which I later opened up to and leaned on and sought, when I needed someone to speak to, I could go to. Reaching out was the best thing I could have done for myself, is to ask someone for help. So that's kind of where my journey, luckily, so far, was at its worst. But then I was very lucky to have a quick turnaround and have improvement pretty quickly.
Yeah, thank you. There's a lot of questions I want to ask, so let me navigate this. You said a couple minutes ago, I have depression, I have anxiety. What does that mean for you to name that? And maybe we can have Jeff also respond. What does it mean to hear your son say that and identify with that?
Go
ahead.
For me, I think to say I have depression despite the fact that for a long time now I've been doing really good. Uh, my medication's been working just fine. My mental health has been pretty good for the most part. To say I have depression is it's that's a good question. I think for me it's to say I know that this is somewhere I've been and it could come back, but I've been through this journey. I know I had now have gained the tools to navigate depression, and it's not something that will ever completely go away from me, but I've learned the tools that I could utilize along the way with the help of others to navigate this mental health. So I think to have depression, that's what it means to me, if that makes sense.
Totally.
So for me, the feelings that I had during depression, I wouldn't want to get out of bed. It was a struggle to get to work. Um, I lacked interest and motivation. I could not, um, I was just negative about things. It's really hard to describe it. One thing through my journey, my wife has been so supportive of me throughout this entire journey. But to this day, she says, I don't know what that's like because she's never had it. And that's right. I mean, both Matthew and I said we didn't know what it was until we had it.
If I could just add, because I guess I didn't address like what it was for me, like in the worst of it. Like when I define depression for how I felt at the worst of those times, like similar to my dad, the lack of motivation, the not wanting to get out of bed. I felt those things, but like I could tell I wasn't myself. Oftentimes, I think people think depression is sadness, and that's kind of how you would identify if you're depressed or not. But for me, oftentimes depression didn't even come to fruition in the form of necessarily having sadness. It was more of a feeling of being empty, feeling like a shell of myself. Um, I felt flat. That's how I would often describe it. Is I felt flat emotionally. There wasn't sadness or happiness. I just felt like a shell. I didn't feel like a person. So when it comes to how I define depression, it could be a range of things, but and people could it could come to fruition for people in many different ways. But for me, it was being flat.
See. Yeah, you used a lot of interesting words like flat and funk, and I think these are good descriptive words for maybe folks who don't want to necessarily use the word depression or use the word anxiety. It could be helpful. I think a question I want to ask Jeff is, while Matthew was going through this and I think coping in his own way with parking the car in front of the house and waiting 5 minutes, was there any thought that he might have been going through something in high school, or on the outside it just looked like everything was business as usual?
I think my wife was probably in a better position to judge that because, fortunately, she was able to quit work after our second son was born. But, I was working, I was at the office, I was working the long hours. I just didn't get the chance to see them. Shame on me.
I'll add to that.
Okay.
You shouldn't. No, like it's not shame on my dad at all. I mean, to answer for my mom, because she came with me to my psychiatrist appointment, she said he's not the same happy kid he used to be. And when we were in that appointment, it hurt. But it was, that still sticks with me because I know that the biggest burden for her was to know I was hurt, but not knowing, for me not to know what to do. So the fact that I was able to open up and get help, that was the best thing I could have done for my mom and for my dad. But yeah, don't. He said shame on him. He shouldn't have said that. But anyway, yeah, I just wanted to say that really quickly.
For me, I felt like it was physiological, the anxiety in particular. I mentioned that time when I thought I was having a heart attack. I mean, I couldn't breathe. I had to pull over my car, and I called my wife and said, I don't know if I'm having a heart attack or not. But I talked myself out of that. But then, that was the start of really starting to know that I was having an issue.
I say the same for me. There were a lot of physiological reactions. Like once I got in a panic in my head or an anxiety attack, I would spiral and I wouldn't be able to sleep. I would oftentimes in high school I'd have sleepless nights due to work I had to do, but more so I had more sleepless nights due to my mental health of having this spiral, and then I just lay in bed, I'd scroll on my phone, I'd try to go back to sleep. None of that would work. So I'd wake up, I'd be awake through the sunrise, and I was like, oh, well, the gym's opening soon. So I just go work out before school because why not? Like, I'm just going to lay here anyway. Might as well do something semi productive, maybe, even though it probably wasn't the best to work out on no sleep. And then I'd go to school and pretend like nothing happened. But yeah, it was a combination of both, but definitely a physiological response.
Definitely. I totally relate to the spiraling message. Like sometimes our brains just go into weird places and we go down that rabbit hole, and sometimes it's hard to get out. So completely relate to that as well. I want to go into a little bit more about um, like what led you to seeking help. I think that seems to be a big barrier for a lot of folks trying to get help and support. So you guys have briefly touched on it. Maybe we can dive a little bit deeper. Jeff, the EAP office was one floor down. You talked about seeing a psychiatrist and then a psychologist or a therapist. Like, what was that like instinct to get you in that door? You could have not gone out of the car that day, you know?
Yeah, if I mentioned earlier that there were earlier markers in my career when I felt like if I examined it, I would have realized I was starting to get depression or something. But that I grew up in a Japanese family, and the feeling of gaman was always there. So I tried to grin and bear it, but it wasn't. It was really when I became dysfunctional that I realized I need help.
For me, when it came to realizing I needed to get help, it was realizing how much my relationships were being affected. My high school girlfriend at the time, that was not going well, and a large part of it was my fault because of this mental health. My best friends I was distancing myself from them when I was at my worst, but even when I was in the mood to hang out, they assumed I wasn't because, to be fair, I was canceling every other time. And then with my family, I was starting fights that were unnecessary. Sorry about that, by the way. I was starting unnecessary fights. I was not talking. I wasn't communicating. And it was mostly when I was seeing the people around me no longer be around me. It was largely my fault. I realized it was my fault. That's when I decided I needed to get help.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. Jeff, you mentioned a Japanese cultural value that I think we can all relate to, gaman.
Or
And I think about
gambatte.
gaman and enryo a lot when I think about mental health. How much do you think that these kind of embedded Japanese cultural values have influenced your maybe pre-mental health journey leading up to that point?
Um, I think a lot. It's ingrained in who you become as you grow up. And I still remember my dad telling me gaman or gambatte, and I never use those terms around my boys very much, but yeah, that was definitely there. Now, there are a lot of cultures that have a stigma around mental health. There are a lot of cultures that do, and that has similar analogous sort of cultural responses to mental health stigma.
A moment there, you just said, I didn't do that to you boys. Could you tell me a little bit more about that? Like, why didn't you perpetuate this gaman culture?
That's a very good question. I don't think I can put my finger on it. Do you feel like I did?
No, it's actually funny. It's actually making me a little emotional to think about it because I haven't thought about it before. But prior to knowing about my dad's mental health or anything, from being a little kid, of course we played sports and like we did all the stuff that quote unquote boys are supposed to do, like when we were growing up, whatever. But we were never like always told like man up or anything like that that was gender focused. It was always more of just like do your best. Like if you're gonna do something, like work hard at it. So in that sense, there's still like the Asian American, like get good grades, that whole thing. But that's everyone. But it was never like this masculinity thing. It was, and like I'm very grateful for that because of it's made me very progressive in the way that I could see the world now, and I'm very open to everyone and anyone and their perspective. But when I was a little kid, I didn't have to unlearn any of that. And I didn't think about that until now. So
Yeah, it's an open conversation for learning about ourselves and each other. Definitely.
yeah.
Jeff, I think as a father, you probably had something deep inside of you that you wanted to stop that cycle of whatever you might have experienced as a child, and you planted that deep in your brain that I'm never going to do that to my kids, and it was reflected in your parenting.
We still fight. Do not get us wrong.
We're human.
For everyone listening, we still fight. We still although in all this talking we might sound like we have everything figured out, we don't. So we're just like every other family.
Thank you for I appreciate it. Okay, you mentioned family. I would love to know, like, Matthew, you're the youngest of three. How has this whole mental health journey resonated with your family of five?
I think for me, I was able to. There have been so many times when I've been able to talk about it with my brothers. Um, of course, we're brothers. We fight. We fight all the time, or we used to fight all the time. But whenever it came to mental health, and it's similar with my dad, like I said, we fight. But when it came to my brothers, my dad, my mom, when it came to mental health, we knew that was the time to like, okay, let me put on this other hat and be there for you. So in that sense, that's the way that this family dynamic has been so. I'm so lucky to have because we could put everything else out the window and know that this is at the forefront and the most important thing to focus on right now. In terms of being the youngest, I think I was I don't remember when it came to fruition about when each of my brothers got depression or were realizing that it was depression. But I think my oldest brother actually realized it last or got depression last. And it was nice where I was kind of then able to give him advice, be like, this is what I experienced in my mental health journey. Even though I'm 6 years younger, let me try to help you out now because I've had more experiences in this area. So yeah, I think if that answers your question.
Totally. It's interesting how age just becomes a number at that point. Yeah. Jeff, any thoughts on how the family has been able to navigate this?
Well, in some ways, I think my boys had it easier dealing with it because I came from a place of empathy. I compare that to a family who hasn't had that and does have more of the instilled Japanese cultural elements to it. It would be harder. Like I try explaining to my mom, who's 87, about all three boys having depression and they got it from me. She just, it doesn't register with her. So in that way, I think it's been helpful for my boys to have me as a resource that is empathetic to what they're going through.
I would also add that there's families out there who, or there's individuals out there who have a hard time coming to the terms that mental health matters. At the very most basic form of this conversation, that mental health is something that can cause as much issues for a person as a broken foot or a broken leg. It could be just as bad, if not worse, to your productivity or whatever you need to get done. So the fact that my parents were at least at the very bare minimum willing to acknowledge that mental health is a reality of something that we need to address, I'm so lucky to have that. And then have parents that have experienced this and have had to talk with therapists themselves or psychiatrists themselves. That was all the extra. So I just to say that from my perspective, like I was lucky to have way more than the bare minimum in terms of a mental health resource as a parent.
Yeah.
We're taking a quick break to introduce Anchor, the sponsor of this podcast. Anchor is free, first and foremost, which is amazing. Who doesn't love free? And you can record everything directly into Anchor. It's so easy to use Anchor. That's how you are listening to this podcast, whether it's Spotify, Apple, the Anchor website. You're listening to it because I uploaded this podcast episode to Anchor. If you want to start your own podcast, I highly recommend Anchor. It's made this whole process so easy. So download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started.
And it's coming back to me, the conversation, Jeff, you were talking to your wife about a chemical imbalance, and Matthew, you overheard that conversation. Was there any other point in time that you guys can remember that you had openly talked about chemical imbalances or any funk or feeling flat?
I didn't know that you remembered that whole discussion.
I don't remember when it comes to that too. I don't even remember if my dad sat me and my brothers down and said, this is something that I'm dealing with. I don't even remember how it came. You didn't?
I never did.
I don't even remember that it was something that I remembered. Maybe it was a dream. It wasn't a dream, but I don't remember how I even remembered that. But in terms of, my dad telling me about his mental health or putting it on my radar, I don't remember, but I do remember like before actually seeking help. Like there were times when it got bad and I had to vent to my parents about how tough this last week or so had been. But at the time, we thought maybe it was just going to be that 1 week and it would disappear. And it would come back, but obviously it came back. But there really wasn't anything open discussions in that way.
I have to say I did have some of the stigma inside me that I kept. My depression and anxiety was probably one of my closest held secrets. I did not talk to other people about that for many, many years. And I'll never forget the day I was so proud of Matthew for having, he mentioned he was the editor-in-chief of the yearbook. He published in the yearbook an entire page that was his story about his mental health. And when I saw that, it just made me feel like, oh my God, I have to learn from my son. He is walking the talk. He is sharing this story and he's helping people. I have to do the same. So I don't know if we're going to have time to talk about changing tides, but when Margaret Shimada and her daughter Courtland first talked to me about changing tides, I thought, that's my opportunity to make a difference. So to this day, I value changing tides tremendously.
We'll definitely save as much time as we need to talk about changing tides. But Jeff, that was so touching to talk about the hearing about the yearbook and that propelled you to want to do more. And you're on the board of directors at LTSC to ensure that this is, going to happen. So thank you for stepping up and making sure that this is a priority. Yeah. Matthew, what did it feel like to hear your dad say that he was proud of your yearbook page?
It's funny because he's told me this before, and I'm so glad, and you know I I I, I probably don't appreciate it as much as I should because of changing tides and because of the fact that this is our goal at this point is to open up people to discuss this. But I mean, I should appreciate it more. But at this point, it's like I don't know. We're so deep into this that we we're trying to even help more people. So like, and I also can't appreciate it as much as I should because I just, you know, we're both fighting the same fight at this point now. So more, and I don't really. It's hard for me to, I guess, conceptualize the fact that I inspired you in that way. It's just like it's something that kind of goes over my head because I when I wrote it, it's because like I would talk to friends here and there, be like, this is what I was going through, and I'm finally feeling so much better because my friends would notice I was doing better. And when they noticed I was doing better, I'd say, well, this is what I was going through. Here's what I did to deal with it. They're like, I've felt that before. I didn't know that's what depression is. I could look into that. When I realized that not all, but the majority of my friends around me were feeling the same way, I was like, well, I wonder how many people at this school are feeling that way. And that's why we decided to put my story in the yearbook. And now, and then that was in alignment with Changing Tides. And that Changing Tides is doing more. Me working with Changing Tides is doing more than I ever could on my own. So, the fact that we're both working towards the same goal is what I think gets to me the most.
Yeah, I've gotten from a place where this was a closely held secret of mine to this is my fourth panel on mental health that I've been on. And so, when I have the opportunity to talk about it, the way I look at it is if I can help one person reach out, then it's been worth it. I think we both feel that way.
Yeah.
We've got almost 50 people on this, so I think that'll be a good goal for tonight. I have one last question in this section, then I want to move on. How has discussing your mental health journey or experiences been helpful for you? I think, Jeff, you just talked about this is your fourth panel, so how has that been helpful?
Well, it's brought me to be able to work for Changing Tides, be part of this crew, meet amazing people. So that's for one. Like without my mental health journey and talking about it, I wouldn't have met so many great people and been a part of so many amazing things, such as this speaker series. And I think it's really helped me I've had strong relationships, but many of those I've continued through even before my depression got to its worst, but it's strengthened all of those. The ones that I've been able to maintain, I've been able to make some of the strongest relationships in my life. So without my mental health journey, I wouldn't have the amazing people in my life and I wouldn't be the person I am today. So discussing it is what has got me to that point.
Anything for you, Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, talking about it has really. I've gotten so many people when I go on these panels. I've heard so many. I've had such a strong reaction from friends that have been there that heard it and say that wow, that was amazing. Thanks for talking about it. So it's got its own intrinsic reward,
Thank you both. So at this point, I kind of want to turn the mic, so to speak, to you folks and ask, if there's anything that you want the audience to hear tonight about maybe what would be your wishes for the audience? What would be like a call to action that you'd want them to explore? What maybe Jeff, we'll start with you. What would that be for you?
Well, I guess primarily if you yourself are struggling, there is no shame in asking for help. The help is out there. You have to look for it. I will tell you one of the hardest things that finding a good a therapist is a very difficult thing to do. I mean, it's hard to find a good one. So I think Matthew's going to talk about this resource list a little bit later. The other part is if you see a family or loved one with any of these triggers, any of these traits, reach out and let them know and that it's safe to talk about it so that they can go out and get some help.
I love those two. So if I can relist those off, it's if you as an individual are struggling, if you need help, go get help. And then if you have someone around you, a loved one who might be struggling, reach out to them, talk to them, and help them get the help that they need.
Right.
To add on, I especially that last point about if you see someone that you think might need help, or if you're just concerned, or if it's just a loved one in general, you're not concerned about their mental health. There's nothing wrong with, saying, how are you really doing? Because I think you greet each other like, hey, like, how's it going? And the answer is it's always supposed to be, oh, I'm fantastic. But like, to be able to go to someone and be like, well, but truly, like, how are you doing? Or if you act like, if anything's ever not good, you could talk to me. Like, those types of, like, letting them know, like, you actually are asking how are they doing is a big help. But to get back to like the work that Changing Tides is doing, and like what my dad was mentioning about finding a therapist, that's been one of our biggest goals of this year, is helping people get access to good, culturally sensitive care. So one thing that's on our website, the Changing Tides website, is our therapist directory. Our therapist directory is a full list of therapists that we have vetted and are able to get more information from them to ensure that they're addressing different needs of people, whether it be, there's answers to where they're located. There's answers to if they have a sliding scale for people in need of or with financial needs. Their approach to therapy, if they do individual, couples therapy, family therapy, group. It's a list to give you more information so you're not scouring Google and just Googling Asian therapists if that's your main priority. And then when it comes to young adults, we have a resource that we're really proud of called CT Stream. CT Stream is our therapy stipend program where we're actually providing free therapy per individual, 6 to 10 free therapy sessions. We've had people go through the program and it's been nothing but positive feedback. We're able to actually match them with options of therapists that we think would be a good fit. And it's not done by me. We have a retired child psychologist who is our intake coordinator, who will make contact with each person who wants one of these stipends, hear more about their needs, and then she'll do the work and say, I think these 2 or 3 therapists would be a good fit. You should reach out to these 2 or 3. These would be the best fit for you. And then Changing Tides covers the costs. So those are like 2 of our resources that are available for just about anyone. Our therapist directory is available for anyone. And, it's such a resource that, if that's your takeaway of like, I don't know what to do, I really encourage people to check that out, because there's such great therapists on that list that are AAPI, non-AAPI, have different specialties. It's something we're really proud of at Changing Tides.
Yeah, I have to say I've referenced that website more times in the past couple of weeks than I've ever referenced another directory like that. So it's pretty outstanding for everyone in the audience. Please check it out. Makoto has listed that along with the Changing Tides website in the chat. So that's available to you right now. Something that I totally didn't think about until right now is, Matthew, would you be willing to talk about what Changing Tides is? I think we've named it, but we haven't actually talked about what Changing Tides is. So
you know what? I should have done that from the beginning before I went into any of this. So that's my bad. Changing Tides is a program of Little Tokyo Service Center. It was created back in 2018. You got involved right in 2018. Mm-hmm. It was started with conversations among 4 college students saying, the AAPI community, none of us are talking about mental health. Those 4 college students then reached out to Margaret Shimada. They reached out to this intergenerational committee that they built out with people of different expertise in marketing and business, whatever it might be, to put together one event. That one event was like a gala fundraiser to kickstart Changing Tides, and it was a day dedicated to discussing mental health openly. From there is where Changing Tides has gone to be able to do this therapist directory, CT stream, continue to do that gala event, and a number of other events that we have coming up. But it was to address mental health, destigmatize mental health, prove that mental health matters. It all came from this need to talk about it. And now more than ever is where we're seeing why Changing Tides is so important. There's this mental health epidemic that is going on right now, and resources like ours and many others are addressing the needs of the AAPI community and beyond, where mental health needs to be discussed and addressed.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think Changing Tides is doing wonderful, great, outstanding work, really getting the word out there about mental health matters, and putting on meaningful events that brings people in, but also promotes the mission and vision of the group. So shout out to those 4 college students for putting their minds together, and of course now as a staff member, working on it as well.
Well, they are all Bruins.
Yeah.
I know, they all went to UCLA, and then I was actually the first non-UCLA student to join their crew. So now I hope I'm doing them a service.
I think you're doing great work, so keep it up. I do want to move us into a Q&A at this time. So if anybody in the audience has any questions, thoughts, comments, please include it in the chat or put it in the Q&A. First question for you, Matthew and Jeff. What advice would you have for families struggling with mental health, both from a parent's and child or adult child's perspective?
I'll go first.
Go ahead.
I think my advice to the parent is that same thing I said a while ago about making sure you're fostering the environment for them to actually tell you how they're actually doing. Oftentimes, kids won't give you the honest response. That's just the truth. But making sure, like, asking how was your day of school is a great question, but asking, like, how are you really doing? Like, have you been doing okay lately? Like, whenever my parents ask me that, like, I'm able to put my shoulders down and be like, honestly, I've been pretty busy. I've been pretty nervous about this, that, the third. And also, even if it seems like they are doing okay, if you have a hunch, like, your kids, if you have a hunch that something's wrong, you could check in on them a little bit more. And, your kid might sass you 9 out of the 10 times and be like, I'm fine. Like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm just playing video games. But that one time that you do ask and they're ready to open up could be the game changer. So, it's terrible that kids can be jerks to their parents sometimes and not even give it a second thought. But that one time could be the biggest difference in the world.
Yeah, I don't know that I can add much to that. I think starting the conversation is the most important part.
Thank you. Another question that came in. Have you ever had an experience where you want to help someone who may be struggling with mental health, whether family or friend, but you also don't want to overstep your boundaries? Any recommendations for supporting them without maybe intruding on their personal space? Wow, that's a great question.
That is a good question. You want to take a stab at that one?
Sure. I think, it's always that conversation. Just saying, like, hey, if you need me, I'm here for you. That, like, or like, if you ever, if like, how are you doing? And if they say good, it's like, I'm curious though, like, how are you really doing? Like, how are things? How's work? How's school? I don't think asking like how someone's doing would ever be overstepping. Or even just checking in with their loved ones and being like, hey, like, how, like, does this person seem like they've been doing okay lately? I'm just a little concerned. I don't think that's overstepping. It's just, you're showing that you care ultimately.
Yeah, I can't think of many people that would be offended by you coming out and saying, no, I really want to know how you're doing. Really. Mm-hmm. I mean, people would look at that as an authentic conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, extending, yourself and saying, hey, how's it going? Right. I think a question that I like to use when I'm trying to gauge how someone is doing is ask them, have they eaten today? And, kind of start from there. So I will definitely be thinking about this conversation the next time I'm going to have a chat with somebody. You two had mentioned, the resource, the directory, the therapist directory listings, and how it is very, I think, vetted, or it's very tailored to the API community. This question is why is it important to get culturally sensitive care?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. So, people have different needs when they go to therapy, whether it be having the immigrant experience and wanting to talk to someone about that. That's huge. Or whether, when it comes to good grades, that's something that everyone has is a pressure for a lot of kids, but that pressure of getting good grades from the Asian American experience, having someone have that same cultural background is big. So, or the model minority myth, like having a therapist coming from an AAPI background could help you and speak to the model minority myth from their experiences and understand what you're talking about. So, that's one of the biggest things when it comes to why culturally sensitive care is important. But there's other needs too. That's a reason why we've added therapists that may not be in the AAPI community, but they address LGBTQ plus needs. So it's really dependent on what you prioritize most when seeking a therapist. But we have found that people who have gone through CT Stream or people who have utilized the therapist directory, having someone with a similar cultural background is one of the top priorities when seeking a therapist.
Oh, that's right. That was part of the questionnaire, huh? Mm-hmm. That's right. That's a good point.
Yeah.
It's one of those, it's helpful to speak the same language, like metaphorically.
Right.
How do you explain to a non-Asian person what gaman is supposed to mean?
Yeah. I've definitely experienced that personally. I've had 2 non-API therapists, so it's taken weeks. Mm-hmm. A question from another community member: do you have any coping techniques that you use when you're experiencing emotional stress or maybe anxiety? What are you doing to help mitigate that or work on that in the moment?
I've taken lead, so okay. The last few.
Well, I mean, for me, it's put the phone down, talk to my wife, let her know that I'm feeling blue again, get outside, walk around, exercise, and if it persists for a long time, then I'll pick up the phone and call my psychiatrist and say, I have not been doing good for the last 2 weeks or whatever it is, and can we have an appointment? And that's usually when I may tweak my med regimen a little bit to help me out there. Just the past couple days, I've been going through, he calls it a funk, I call it being blue, where I've been blue, and I've reached out and talked to my wife about it. And so she forces me to go and help her walk the dog, stuff like that.
Is this like a code word phrase that you have that has been helpful in your relationships?
Yeah, it has, because she knows exactly what I mean when I tell her I'm feeling blue again.
I think for me, people know a funk, what I mean, or and I'm lucky. I'm growing up in the generation of people where in the last few years, mental health is just something you could discuss with almost anyone in my age range. And to credit of, I'm not saying Changing Tides changed the whole world, but back when Changing Tides was created in 2018, kids my age weren't able to do that. So in this day and age, in my age as well, this is the time where mental health is able to be discussed. But for me, when it comes to coping in these times, for one, I need to exercise almost every day, maybe to a fault. Not to say I'm like a huge muscle man or anything, but like I need to work out or else I can't move on with my day. And then when it's these down times or a funk, I check in with myself. I think, well, is it something that's causing this? And if so, let me try to work through that. But if I'm noticing it's just this chemical imbalance, it's a funk without necessarily a quote unquote reason, there's no cause and effect, that's when I have to look at it and be like, well, maybe I need to check in with my psychiatrist. Maybe I need to eat cleaner for the day. Maybe I need to sleep earlier. If it's not a causation, that's when I have to like look at the chemical imbalance side of things.
Yeah, our bodies are very complex. There could be a lot of things.
Yeah.
I think this will be the last question. So, and this comes from maybe an adult child perspective or a child's perspective. Any tips on how to bring up topics with parents who may not be open to talking about mental health?
Ooh, that's tough because I was lucky enough to not have to experience that. From my friends who have told me that this is something that they experience, it's gonna. I'll be frank. It might be really difficult. Uh, and there are occasions when that might not work out for the individual, or it might take a lot of time for the parent to come around on it. But to know that you have more of a support system as well in that worst case scenario where they might not come around, to know that you have more of a support system around you that you can talk to is huge. So it might not need to be your parents. It could be your best friend. It could be your auntie, your uncle, your grandparent. And, but when it comes to having that difficult conversation with your parent, they might surprise you. When it comes to their own kid, they'll move mountains for you. So I do think that worst case scenario hopefully won't happen, because when it comes to their own kid, they want you to be the best version of yourself ultimately. So although historically or in the news, they might not be open to talking about mental health or acknowledging it, when it comes to you, I think that there's a very good chance that hopefully that wouldn't be the case.
That was amazing.
No, I agree.
Okay, I lied. I have one more question for you too, and maybe this one's for Jeff. I think you could really speak to this one. How can you encourage someone to reach out or speak to a professional when they are hesitant to maybe talk to a stranger about their feelings or what they're experiencing?
Well, so when I look for a doctor in the mental health field, I actually look for someone that's not that's different than me, because the Japanese community is a small one. The Asian community is a small one. So this is just me. I found it more comfortable to talk to someone that I don't know, that doesn't have the reach.
Yeah. Matthew, any other thoughts on that question?
I think a lot of it also has to do. I'm very comfortable with giving a content warning even in speaking, or like, are you comfortable with me bringing up depression, like airing out that question before, because I'm so comfortable with talking about it. I know not everyone else is. So if I'm saying like, are you comfortable with me talking about mental health to you or something along those lines, I think in that sense, talking to a stranger has been really helpful. But when it comes to someone specifically in the mental health field, they're trained to be able to bring on anyone. I was having a discussion recently with someone within Changing Tides. They said, therapists these days are trained to be able to talk with different groups that aren't within their realm of life, of their demographic. Yeah. So although you might want to find a therapist who is within your demographic, mental health professionals are trained to speak to anyone from any background. So in that sense, I think that gives me comfort in knowing that anyone in the field should have the tools to at least try to understand where I'm coming from.
Definitely. And I'll say for the two non-API therapists I've had, they've had that empathy in them to want to learn about
Right.
Enryo or Gamon. So I totally agree with you on that. Well, we are about out of time. Matthew, I want to ask if there's anything you want to plug for Changing Tides, anything coming up that people should know about?
Yes, so coming off the tail end of just mentioning that I'll give a content warning, I will throw one out right now. One of our events coming up does have to do with suicide. It's something that is a side of mental health that is especially not discussed, but unfortunately, it's a reality for a lot of AAPI young adults, seniors, adults, whatever it might be. Unfortunately, suicide is a side of mental health that is a reality. So, with that, Changing Tides wants to address this suicide and raise awareness and also provide resources towards suicide prevention. So, with that, we've created Ripple Effect Walk for Suicide Prevention. It's a walk in memory of those who have unfortunately passed by suicide, and also to give people tools to hopefully, if you have those discussions with people, have the tools to help save a life. And this event is a fundraiser, but it's going to be an amazing day to bring people together in Long Beach State at the Jack Rose track on July 16th. And it's something that we need to address, and Changing Tides is happy to have that conversation because that's what Changing Tides has always been all about.
Wonderful. July 16th. So everyone mark your calendars. Makoto has put a link for the event in the chat here, so click on it when you have a moment. But with that, Jeff and Matthew, thank you so much. This was one of the most wonderful conversations I've had about mental health. So thank you both for your time. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having us.
Yeah. Thanks for everyone for listening too. Thank you to Keiro for inviting us onto their show. If you want to find out more, Keiro's website is linked in the podcast episode description. And my dad and I did a talk like this a while back for Nisei Week. And if you want to hear that, that will also be linked in the episode description. But with that said, thank you again to Keiro. We were really honored to share our story. If you enjoyed this episode, you can subscribe to our show that releases on every other Tuesday. Give us a rating or review on your favorite podcast platform. And if you would like to support our podcast and help us grow, you can do so with a donation to the link at the bottom of the episode description. To hear more about Changing Tides, follow us on Instagram at LTSC_Changing Tides, or check out our website, thechangingtides.org. Let's continue to change the tides on mental health.
Yeah.